So since 2015 in the UK we've had nice guidance for type 1 diabetes in adults that supports access to CGM for people with type 1 diabetes who have challenging hypo or hyperglycemia. That's enabled us to use those guidelines to try to access CGM and to support people with type 1 diabetes. But the challenge is really trying to ensure that those guidelines are implemented. They're not mandated by law, so what we have to try to do is use those guidelines to support business cases at a local level. So services in the UK are commissioned locally by clinical commissioning groups. So while there's national guidelines, we have local solutions to commission different things at a very, very small local basis. So in North West London, there are 8 clinical commissioning groups that cover a population of 2 million people in total. And what we have tried to do is go to that whole group of 8 clinical commissioning groups and use the NICE guidance to support commissioning of CGM for adults with type 1 diabetes. So this is the big problem, that they're guidelines, they're not mandated, and it means that they're open to interpretation and open to different ways of commissioning and using them. So they're absolutely not applied with any sort of equity across England, and there are lots of areas that don't commission CGM at all, and there are areas that do commission it in line with the guidelines, such as our area. Yeah, absolutely. So if you live just across one boundary, you may not have any access at all to CGM, and if you move 2 streets away, you may fall under an area that does have access to CGM. I don't know of specific cases, but I'm sure that there are times when people may feel motivated to move GP, or if they're moving house, they might think carefully about where they'd like that house to be. But as I said, I don't know that for sure, but I suspect people would consider that. One of the problems with the UK is that we don't know how many people use CGM. We don't have a robust way to collect those data, so we don't have a system of payers where there's clear registration of people who are buying and using CGM, and we don't know at the moment, because of all the different local solutions, we don't know the number of people that can access CGM through local commissioning. So it's difficult to answer that question without numbers. But if you look at the data from studies like the JDRF study, which was now over 10 years ago, wasn't it? Compared to the Diamond study, for example, what we saw was that there was much greater usability, and that related to sustained use over the course of those studies, much more so in the Diamond study recently than with the JDRF study in the past, suggesting that the improvements in devices has improved sustainability and, as you call it, the stickiness of the intervention. We're able to access CGM, so for us it's hugely changed how we've been able to implement CGM for people with type 1 diabetes. So for the 25% of people in our clinic who have significantly impaired awareness of hypoglycemia, we're now able to offer them a solution that isn't just pump therapy. We're able to give them CGM, and we're able to ensure that they have real-time alerts and alarms for impending hypoglycemia and actual hypoglycemia. So from our point of view, in terms of how we deliver care for people with challenging hypoglycemia particularly, it's made a huge difference. That has been done, but the data are not, up until now, collected systematically. So previously there were individual funding requests that would have been submitted locally, and different CCGs would have known how many individual funding requests had been submitted and approved for CGM. Insulin pump therapy is a bit different because that's covered by a NICE technology appraisal, and that is mandated by law. So we have better data about pump therapy, and that's also been a guideline that's been around since 2008. So we've got better data for pump than we have for CGM. The problem is that it's not been collected particularly systematically up until recently, but we now have the National Insulin Pump Audit that is using the local knowledge from each specialist centre to collate data nationally about the number of people using insulin pump and CGM technologies. So not until recently, but we will now start to have some more robust data to look at. Self-funding pump therapy is very rare, I think, in the UK. There are some people with type 2 diabetes who self-fund pump therapy, but with people with type 1 diabetes, they're almost all able to access pump therapy through their local specialist centre. There historically have been lots of people self-funding CGM. As time goes by locally, we're now able to move those people over and we're able to support them using CGM without self-funding. And I understand there are some areas that do a sort of co-pay or a co-funded relationship where the CCG will pay for some of it and the user pays for some of the other funding, but I'm not quite clear how that works sustainably or how that will continue to work. I would hope that what we'll see over the next few years is that as the NICE guidance are implemented more equitably across the country, we'll see people who are self-funding hopefully no longer need to continue to self-fund and it'll be supported. I think what we need to do is hopefully what we're already doing, which is that specialists need to be vocal about implementing the guidelines, supporting people with type 1 diabetes to achieve an optimal HbA1c through self-management. The NICE guidance supports a target of 6.5% or 48 millimoles per mole, and we need to really use technologies to empower people to achieve that outcome. And if we as specialists are vocal about that, if we try to push the guidelines and ensure that there are business cases to clinical commissioning groups and that we communicate with commissioners and primary care colleagues that these are important outcomes, then I think we will all move in the right direction together.